Hey everyone, it's Adrian here from the Bold Choice Podcast. I'm back with a bonus clip of something I talked about in episode number 6. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend that you give it a listen, just so you're kind of up to speed on what I want to talk about, because this bonus clip here is an extension of what I talked about. And just to summarize without spoiling for anyone that didn't listen to it, I talked about the culture of abuse and assault in hockey. And I wanted to extend that discussion to the realm of sports as a whole, not just hockey, because hockey is not the only sport where we see instances of abuse and assault, come to light. It happens in a lot of sports. And when we think of sports, we think mostly of the competition. We think about how it unites people together, it brings communities together. And the culture around sports has always been to showcase athletes and teams to show off, their skills, their talents, everything that they've worked extremely hard for, and to be praised by the public for their hard work. And that's, still true. We applaud all these amazing athletes for their hard work, which often starts at a young age. And to see them, win that championship or gold medal or all these various accolades throughout their career and beyond, that's amazing. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that goes unnoticed in sports. We turn a blind eye towards, and we've seen that with the Chicago Blackhawks organization, how we've gone more than a decade of not knowing what's been happening behind the scenes. And yeah, I understand the reasons for those players to not speak up about it because it's not their place, but a lot of people have lost respect for those so-called leaders of that team who didn't speak up, who acted like nothing happened. They just assumed that it was part of being on the team, and not having to defend, the young man, Kyle Beach, who was assaulted. And this happens in a variety of sports, not just hockey. And abuse in sports is rarely given attention because it's going to diminish the value of sports, and that's not what the organizations want. That's not what the professional leagues want, and that's not what the media wants. The media often has their objective in portraying a certain story. We've seen various reporters across sports, across different teams, who tell a certain story, and some are amazing at it, some are downright horrendous. We've seen a mix of both. But the one thing, as a fan myself, when a scandal comes out, I look into all the facts first, because headlines are often misleading. They often tell one side of the story, and I want to know all the facts before I can come to a understanding of what I've learned. And a lot of these scandals are often difficult to understand because there's so many different elements to those where you don't know what to believe. You don't know, who's been lying to you. You don't know who's, telling the truth. And we see how various athletes at the end of their career are accused of various crimes like assault. And there's always the notion, especially in Canada, where you're innocent until proven guilty, right? And people want to know the facts before they come to a decision, and rather than speak falsely on someone's name. There's always those kind of perspectives that we keep in our head. We don't want to jump to the wrong conclusion. And in sports, there's been a whole variety of athletes that have been accused of these crimes, sexual assault, domestic abuse, all these different things that would normally end one's career. Like if you put an average person, Joe Schmo, I use that name a lot, when I'm talking about, a hypothetical person. If he assaulted, his wife, and caused a lot of damage, that's, a crime right there. That's assault. Now, I don't know the legal aspects to all this. I'm not a criminal justice student, but you can figure out, exactly what the possible punishments are, what the sentences would be if convicted and all that. And a lot of people get away with it. A lot of people, come to those, settlements behind the scenes, and they just, find a way to keep their name, as clean as possible. And we see this, in different relationships in sports. We see this, with coaches and athletes, trainers and athletes, in terms of, the types of abuse. But there's also, verbal abuse, discrimination, racism. A lot of that exists, within the power structure. The people who have control of your career, they're the ones who get the final say. And if you speak up about what they said to you, you lose your career. And we saw that with Akim Aliu, a former NHL player who was coached by Bill Peters, within the Calgary Flames organization. And essentially, Bill Peters, got out of hand and said a variety of things to Akim Aliu. And Aliu, as a person of color, felt like this was undeserving, like he was being discriminated against. And I think a few years ago, maybe 2020 or around that time, he came forward with a story. Bill Peters was kind of banished from the NHL, and he's in the Russian league now. And we see that what it could do to careers, both the victim and the perpetrator. And we always want to see justice for the people that suffer. We want them to feel like their voice is heard, and they're not being neglected or ignored. And there's cases where victims are given that justice, and there's times when they're not. In the case of Reid Boucher, the former Vancouver Canuck, who just pled guilty to sexual assault, for him to get the easiest possible punishment, to do a variety of things, and his name's going to be kept off the record, and it's going to be kept clean. That's a huge insult to the victim, to their family, to everything that they've gone through. And I don't know what Reid Boucher is going to do in his future. I really, don't care what happens to him. But this is one of the things that makes, our justice system and just sports as a whole look so bad, when you combine both. Because athletes always get the benefit of the doubt. They have a career, they're people of power, they have prestige, they have these accolades, and it's not worth ruining their career, their hard work, over one little crime. Yet it's perfectly okay for them to ruin the life of someone else that doesn't have that same prestige or power. And there's just so many forms of abuse that we need to be aware of. It's verbal, it's physical. There's a lot of, things that happen, in a coaching relationship with a player where, things get out of hand. You may be frustrated at a player, but when you cross that line and you use a racial slur, when you use something homophobic, that's not, you being a coach at that point. That's not you being a person of power. That's you violating that person. And that's extremely unacceptable in the realm of sport. And I talked about it in the episode, but the old boys club, that's something that desperately needs to go away. And it's easier said than done. These are guys that have been in sports for such a long time, have reputations that precede them, but they have a certain way of thinking, and we need sports to have more forward thinkers, people who think like us and think of things in the way that affects us in the future. It's not just sports and business. You need to be thinking of how, these various issues affect us as a society. And just the whole aspect of abuse and toxic masculinity, there's so much that, you can talk about, but the overall impact it has, is immeasurable. It's very essential that the culture of abuse in sports is brought to the public's attention, and that, some form of retribution is brought to, the abusers appropriately. The people that sexually, verbally, emotionally, physically abuse people, they need to be punished. They need to be taken into consideration that, they violated someone. They violated, that position of power. When you're a coach, when you're a general manager, when you're a trainer, whatever the case may be, you have this power and this prestige that not many people have. That's a position that you work hard for, and you're going to tarnish that reputation over abuse. Like, it doesn't make sense at all. And, to all the athletes, and not just athletes as a whole, I mean this, like, to anyone who's been a victim to assault, to abuse. I can't imagine, what you've gone through and what you're going through, because that's not something that goes away. And in very, certain cases, it reopens wounds when you hear about the next scandal that comes up. When people, celebrate the acquisition of a player that has a checkered past, like Evander Kane on the Edmonton Oilers. For a guy like Connor McDavid to support that and say, he's a great hockey player. He may be a great hockey player, but he has a whole variety of issues in his past that he's going to bring into your locker room, that he's going to bring into your organization. And as the best player in the hockey world, Connor McDavid, you're seriously saying that you support this. Like, you need to look yourself in the mirror. And I understand that you want to win as a hockey player. We all want to see you win as a hockey player. But when you endorse that kind of behavior, that kind of attitude of abusers, and you enable them, you make them feel like they're wanted, that doesn't do any good. So that's my, obviously, perspective on what Connor McDavid said. But to conclude, it starts with, obviously, sports organizations and leagues, finding a way to implement change, within that whole power structure, to make sure that everybody knows the punishments that are at stake. If you violate the rules, you violate someone else. Organizations, are putting policies and codes of conduct into place to prevent abuse in sports, and how they can now reflectively respond to these abusive situations, and to not, push it aside, to address it head on, and to let, people know that it's not okay. And overall, the last thing I'm going to say is the culture of abuse in sports belittles, the positive aspects of sport. Like I said, sports, brings the best out of us. We're always entertained by, the greatest athletes, the greatest sports, all the great sporting performances. Like, sports has, a great impact on us. There's no denying it. But when there's this culture of abuse that just lingers over like a dark cloud, it just creates hesitancy in young athletes from pursuing the sport, in the fear of going through that abuse and having to lose their career over, someone's disgusting actions. And it's something that won't go away overnight. It won't go away a week from now. It's going to take some time, and it's going to be a result of the changes we make now. The result of changes that we make as individuals in teaching one another that abuse and violence is never the answer, and we need to come forward in solidarity with all those who have been victimized, that have, gone through that struggle, that pain, and show them that we are with them, we support them, we believe them, and that we're not going to let abusers, assaulters, whatever you want to call them, get away with it. That they're not going to take away, the life that we're meant to live. And I know that we'll see a variety of instances across the board, across various sports, where these scandals come to light, and it's going to be, that cycle all over again, where we learn about it, we try to push that message, and we think that we know what we're doing, and then it's going to come back to haunt us. So we need to break that cycle. We need to end the stigma, and we need to stand up for what is right, and that is standing up to the people that violate their position of power. And we're with the people who have been abused and assaulted. We're with them. and we have their back throughout it all.